Hey Crosstown, thanks for joining us for a conversation around the vision of our church, which is to lead people to discover, develop, and display full devotion to Jesus Christ. And joining me to have this conversation is Pastor Andy, our Olean campus pastor. His job is to care for and equip the people at Crosstown Olean. And his partner in crime at the Olean campus is Pastor Eber, who not only oversees the Roots and Kids Zone ministries at the Olean campus, but he actually oversees all of family ministries. That's why we call you the family pastor around here. He keeps us all in check. And so he does a great job of leading our Kids Zone and Roots directors at all campuses. And the reason I wanted you to be a part of this conversation, Pastor Eber, is not only because you're a pastor at Crosstown, but you can directly speak into how this vision impacts not just the grown-ups, but our kids ministry and student ministry. We don't have multiple visions and mission statements for our church. We have one, which again is to lead people to discover, develop, and display full devotion to Jesus Christ. Sure. That looks a little bit different,
just a little bit,
for student and children's ministry, and so we want you to be a part of this conversation as well. So we're going to take 3 weeks to talk about revisioning what the church could be, should be, and your part in it. And I didn't want that conversation to stop on Sunday morning. I wanted to leverage all forms of media, social media, to be able to continue this conversation. So I really appreciate you leaning in and tuning in to have this conversation with us so that you can fully engage with the vision here at Crosstown. So I talked about 3 Ds in that vision statement: discover, develop, and display. Today we are going to talk about the first D, which is discover, which is not just a abstract word, discover. It's really an environment where we're intentionally trying to leverage on Sunday morning to lead people to discover a relationship with Jesus. That environment is
Sunday morning church,
the worship service, Sunday morning church. So could you guys first and foremost describe your experience with church, your first initial, you shared this a few weeks ago in a Christmas message, what you felt initially coming into church, because what I don't want to get lost in this conversation is what it actually means to be a first-time guest. Some of us have been Christians for so long, and you've been coming to church, I know, for so many weeks and years over your life, that some of that gets lost, and you lose the feeling of what it felt like when you first walked into church, and how God changed your life so that you can be a part of changing other people. So why don't you remind people, since you were the one that told that story a few weeks ago?
Well, yeah, I mean, that's loaded, because everybody's situation, their life experiences leading up to the first time they come to church or when they're invited to church could be so different. And, we talked a little bit about, like, you could be just totally nervous. Like, I don't know, you might feel like everybody's looking at you, or are you going to sit in somebody's seat and get a look? So all those things can come into play. But I know for me, my own experience, we get nervous when we invite people, or to think like, all I gotta do is invite somebody to church, and we get nervous with that. Well, I had gone to church on and off throughout my life. I kind of grew up in the church, but yet I hadn't been in several years. When I was 18, and I knew my mom was going to want to go, but I had been getting invited to church by 2 or 3 people, separate people in my life, like totally separate. One I worked with, one I went to school with, and I wasn't offended by that. It's kind of funny. Like I would never thought, like, I can't believe that person's inviting me to church. Like, what a jerk. Like, instead
Were you friends with those people?
I was. They were.
Friends don't get.
I know. Yeah, it wasn't like
out of shape.
It wasn't like mean for them to invite me to church. In fact, I thought, like, well, yeah, I probably should go to church, or I know my mom's going to want to.
Right.
But when I went, I never, that initial experience, it was an evening service for right before Christmas, but I didn't feel judged when I walked in. They were expecting company, the place I went to. That was nice. I didn't feel like, I'm going into somebody else's living room and it feels weird. Instead they were expecting company, and and then I walked in, and of course it was amazing. The lights went down, all this music started, and I had chills throughout the service, and just like leaning on the edge of my seat, wondering like, what is happening here? So it was way different than anything I expected. I expected to probably go and like just make my mom happy, and that's because that's what I did in high school. And instead, I had an encounter with the God of the universe, and I didn't realize
that was life changing for you. So I think sometimes we often forget, because some of us have been going to church for so long, and it becomes like this normal experience. We expect it every Sunday. We're going to sing some songs. We're going to hear a message, and hopefully it impacts our life. But it's pretty nominal. It's not like this life-changing experience every single Sunday. And yet within our congregations, hopefully every Sunday, it is for someone.
Yeah.
It is for someone. So that one idea should influence and impact everything that we do on Sunday morning. Not just how I preach, not just how you lead worship, and not just how you structure your kids' ministry, but everything, the greeting, the ushering. It should have a focus on that one individual with that in mind. There's all kinds of other things happening too, but that one individual who could have a life-changing experience with Jesus. Mm-hmm. For you, it was goosebumps, it was edge of your seat you talk about, and that's not everybody's experience. And so let's not forget that for someone that is their experience.
Absolutely.
Go ahead.
Well, I would say, like even the music. So we intentionally do all those things that you kind of just said, though, right? We've got people hopefully greeting and being, very friendly. We actually have conversations with our people to say, like, be looking for guests. Like, it's not up to us as a few leaders.
Right.
Like, everybody, if you're somebody who comes every single week, and this is old hat to you, you need to be looking around for those new people and be welcoming to them. Exactly. And I don't know what the statistics are other than the ones that are made up on the spot, but that, if you're greeted by, 5 to 10 people or whatever that first time, and you know some people, it makes a huge difference in whether they're going to come back.
Right.
They felt welcome.
The two that come to mind, and I don't know if they're made up, but they do make sense, is that within the first 7 minutes of someone's experience, they made up their mind whether or not they're going to stick to that church.
Sure.
And you think about that has nothing to do with the preacher, that has nothing to do with the music, maybe the pre-service music, but more so it's
just the engagement of people.
Was there parking for them?
Yep.
Did someone say hello? Was the coffee good? Right?
That's important.
Was it easy for me to check in my kid if I had kids? Were they friendly? Were they rude? So all of that happens before the 7-minute mark, and first impressions really do matter. The other made-up statistic, perhaps, I don't know, as far as how many times people need to be greeted, it wasn't a stat. It actually reminded me of a story. I don't think he'll mind me sharing, but I won't say the last name. His name is Bill. He attends the Arcade campus, and he first started coming to the Wellsville campus. His wife works in Wellsville as a nurse, and so they had moved from an area in Pennsylvania, which they came from a great church there that was highly friendly, put a big emphasis on first impressions. And so they walked into the churches that they were visiting with this thought in mind, that they were looking for a church that welcomed them, said hello, greeted them in some form or fashion no less than 10 times. 10 times.
Wow.
And we passed.
Nice.
We passed. I don't know if it was 10 or 11, but the way Bill told me the story was, people at the door, people at the hospitality center, when they walked into the sanctuary, there was people that intentionally walked over to greet their family. We call them sanctuary spotters, where it's a great idea that I learned a few years ago, where we don't just have greeters at the door, but it's usually when they walk into the sanctuary where it's most uncomfortable.
Exactly.
We're like, okay, we're waiting for the service to start, no one's talking to me. And so all those people actually made an environment where this family felt comfortable. And now they're under the care of Pastor Stu, and they still feel comfortable. And so that was a huge impact on them. And there's, a lot of other stories that are probably falling into that same category.
For sure.
So the environment matters.
Yeah. Well, I mean, right down. So we have a first-time guest bag where we have a coffee cup and an invite and a pen.
Information about the church.
Little things like that. People are not expecting a gift when they come. I mean, unless they are church hoppers, right? They've been to all these different churches. They're not necessarily expecting that kind of welcome, that kind of gift. And again, like, that's just a being intentional that we're expecting company. Another thing that we do behind the scenes is we tell our normal members or normal people to keep the back rows somewhat empty. I mean, you don't want them so empty that, but still, like, you don't make a habit of having them full that way, because when I watch people when they come in sometimes, like if it's, Pastor Eber's doing announcements or something on the back and somebody's sneaking in, that's a little uncomfortable feeling, like, where are you going to sit? And if there's a seat that's easy for them to get to quick, that makes
or
it
if
feel
everybody's
more
standing.
Yeah.
If you ever come to the service late, which I know none of you probably ever do, but
late.
you walk in and we're singing, it looks like there's not any seats
Yeah.
available because everybody's kind of blocking that. And so having easy access, those are just little things. And you think about, I often think about this where when I used to do the connection card talk, and now you guys do it a lot, but it's like you say the same thing
Right.
verbatim by memory over and over again. People know who you are. I have to say that every time when I preach. People know who I am most of the time. But it's just making sure that the person, the one or two people that were experiencing this for the first time, are on the same page with everybody else. That's huge, and it often gets lost in some environments that we want to make sure that we're intentional about. The other thing that you said, Andy, that I picked up on with your story, and then Eber, you can share some of your background with first coming to church, is it seemed like inviting was a tag team sport.
Yeah. Yep.
That it wasn't just that one person in. I've heard that everybody's separated just by 6 degrees, right?
Mm-hmm.
So your friend knows someone who knows you, and you can leverage that to invite someone to church.
And it's great that's us sometimes like trying to do the work, like, hey, you invite, but most of the time it's just a God thing, right? That God is in his providence is working behind the scenes. If you remember back to like Josh Torrey had a really neat testimony.
Yeah.
This was, over 7 years ago now when we opened our Olean campus, launched our first campus, but he'd gotten things in the mail. He saw it in the paper. He's like hearing it on the radio. Or so. There was just so many things. It was almost like, what the heck? Like, I better go to this place. He almost felt assaulted, but like in a good way. But he's like, God must be trying to tell me something. And so I've heard story after story like that. I don't know if it was Thomas who had 5 invites or something too, but so many other people have told us over the years. It was just like, man, it was like billboards just telling me I needed to come.
The difference between the ground attack and the air attack, you have to have support on all aspects.
But again, that's not. We try, but that's a God thing. He just works it out. And I think in Josh's story, it came down to like after weeks of not going yet, he then saw that invite on a desk. Like, it reappeared again, and he thought, man, God's trying to tell me something.
So the biggest thing I heard you just say, Andy, that you guys need to hear as well is that your invite, your ask, your effort really does matter. And it might not seem like a lot, and it might not even work at first. But if collectively we come at this, both from the organization of our church as well as you personally, it really does make a difference, and it can make an eternal difference in someone's life. And it did for you guys, and it did for me. We have similar stories in that regard. What's your story? What did you feel like first coming to church, and how can you take that experience from your past, which may have been a while ago, because I know you're no spring chicken. He looks like a spring chicken, but he's not a spring chicken. How do you bring that into being a pastor now?
Wow.
How does it shape you?
My story is nothing like really Pastor Andy's in that aspect, that I kind of was brought to church as an infant. And so church has always been
You
part
grew
of...
up in church.
I basically did. And so, the aspect of going to church became kind of required. And so my whole aspect of going changed. And I didn't want to be there, and I just did it, like you said, to make my parents happy, or I was forced to do it. But I remember the opportunity that I had, and just being involved and serving, but yet seeing that God is taking the whole aspect of Sunday morning service and making it enjoyable and exciting, and something that I looked forward to.
But that wasn't always the case.
That wasn't always the case.
Was church boring for you growing up?
At times it was, and it definitely impacted my relationship and my walk with Christ at that time. And I remember when he called me into ministry and said and at first it was a job. Hey, I'm going to school, I get my degree, I'm doing this. But really quickly into that, God changed that to say it's enjoyable. This is when you're doing what God wants us to do, he makes it enjoyable and exciting. And really early on in getting into ministry, it just became not a job, or I didn't look at it as I have to do this. This is what I want to be there. I want to invite people. I want people to come in and experience this aspect of what ministry and church looks like. And especially, I'll be a little bit Crosstown. I remember walking in the first Sunday at Crosstown, and not knowing exactly who I was going to see. I knew Pastor Andy, which that was great, but I didn't know what I was going to see. I didn't know what my family would experience.
Sure.
And you're talking about what Bill's experience was like, and some of these other people that we know. That's what ours was like. We walked in and it was super friendly. The people that I did recognize, There wasn't this, oh, what are you guys doing here? It was, hey, welcome. I'm so happy you're
Right,
here.
yeah, that
And
kind of
then
breaks down
it
like
does.
barriers.
And for my kids, if you know my kids, my boys with autism, they didn't look at them as, oh, you got some special needs kids. This is your kids. This is awesome. We're so happy to have them here. And so in that aspect, it really made me and my wife be like, wow. And then the biggest thing that really hit us is when we were leaving that first Sunday, both of my boys looked at us and said, when are we coming back?
Oh,
And that to me was like, all right, God.
Yeah.
I mean, because I didn't know where God was taking us at that time in our life, but he was like,
that's cool.
here it is. And I was like, okay.
I really love that about our church. It
Yeah.
seems to have been that culture from the very beginning for a long time now, and then it just breeds on top of that, person to person passing the baton and creating this culture where there's a welcoming environment. And your big part of that, your boys were teenagers. I don't know if they're still teenagers now.
No, they're not.
Late
They're in their
teenagers.
20s. They're in their 20s now. I'm old. Remember
Big
you said
boys.
that.
He is.
I'm old.
But they were teenagers.
They were.
And so you're
Young teens,
creating
yeah.
a culture where teenagers don't find church boring, and
That's the hope.
we don't mean that we need to have laser light shows and anything like that, but
That
it
wouldn't hurt
does need to be
occasionally.
relevant, it does need to be engaging. And what you said, it created such a family cultural
It did.
environment where people
And that's
Look
what I
forward
feel,
to it.
yeah, church should be like. And I think that, if you can look at, and even as parents, engage with your kids to say, man, church isn't about just doing it because we're supposed to, but we're doing it because we want to.
Yeah.
And that's the connection points.
Why do we have to convince people that church is fun and relevant and important and valuable, and it's, you shouldn't have to have a conversation where you have to convince people, right?
No.
And I don't think that's the case for the majority of people who attend our church, at least, so.
But I think it's because of bad experiences.
Yes.
I mean, why would you have to convince somebody? It's either from bad experiences or from being told about bad experiences.
Yes.
From having a college professor who says, don't believe any of that stuff, it's all lies anyway, full of contradictions in the
Right.
Bible. And if you take that at face value and don't investigate for yourself, well, now you're going to be in the dark, and then you have this bad attitude towards something you have no idea about.
Yeah, right.
So,
Well, statistics say, right or wrong, whether this is accurate or not, but 1.7 times per month people regularly attend church.
sure.
You
That's
you
not
would
a
say,
statistic.
I would say
Many
that's.
I don't know if it's made up.
I don't
think
know
it's
what
probably
it is.
pretty
Well,
accurate.
1.7. That's
not
like
good.
that's like having 2.5 children, right? Is the average, but yeah, that's not good. That's
Yeah.
not average, or that's
It's
not,
not healthy.
good average. I understand when somebody has to miss for work, travel, or sickness. But other than that, we should make this a priority
Right.
as part of our lives. And that's not me speaking as a pastor. I was just a volunteer for 13 years before coming to Crosstown, before being a pastor, and I missed 1 to 2 Sundays a year. And it wasn't because of legalism. It wasn't because well, if I'm not there, I'm not saved. Not
Right.
at all. I wanted to be there.
Yeah.
And the big thing too, here's a secret, guys. If you get into serving in church, not only are you doing the right thing and giving back, but you need to be there. This is a commitment we make,
Right,
and I can't imagine not being in church. And the few
Yeah.
people that when they maybe share with me that they missed, they I just don't feel right when I miss
You
church.
missed it.
I
Yeah.
my week isn't right. You miss
Yeah.
the
When you
beginning
miss
of your week.
church, you should
Yeah.
should miss it.
genuinely miss
Yeah.
being there with your
And that's the
spiritual
scary
family.
thing, really, we're in this weird time right now with COVID, and because there was a legitimate reason to not be in church, for a while, and maybe there still is for some people, it's scary when we get into a new habit that's not
Yeah,
beneficial
sure.
for us,
That's-
that can be detrimental. So, anything you do that's a habit like that, it's easier to go than not go, it's
Yeah.
better to go than not go, so.
Yeah, I think that's important. And one of the things that I think we need to be reminded of is the frequency in which we need to fill ourselves
Yeah.
spiritually. Hopefully that's happening every day.
That's right.
But we want to be intentional with Sunday. And you only get 52 days a week, or no, 52 days a year to experience that. And so if you say I'm showing up, once, twice a month, you're really limiting not only your ability to be poured into and to experience fellowship, but your family and your kids' ability to do that as well. Compare that with the amount of time that they spend, I know with our kids, with Xbox or screen time or their phone or the influence with other kids in their school.
Yep.
you wonder why that
Oh,
there's
my
a
goodness,
there's a
yeah.
problem, right? There's a disconnect
Yeah.
because the amount of culture that gets poured into our kids versus, biblical truth, is off balance.
It is
right?
off
So that's why one of the big things that we want you to hear today is make church a priority, because there's something important and valuable that happens at church, which gets us back to the whole D that we're talking about, is discovering Jesus. We want you to discover Jesus, not just initially at salvation, but ongoing. We want you to continue to experience Jesus anew and grow in your relationship with him. We think that happens best at worship services. We think that happens best on Sunday morning. And so, make it a priority, invest in your family to make it a priority, and come to church.
Amen.
So we're preaching Jesus because people need Jesus.
Amen.
And so I want to first start with you. We'll start with the kids, and then we'll go to the students, and then we'll tie it in all together, because we're all pastors, commissioned by God to care for the flock and to preach Jesus to them. But kids need Jesus. They don't just need to hear about Nehemiah.
That's right.
Kids need Jesus. They don't just need to hear about a guy who ran away from, his responsibility and got eaten up by a fish. Kids need Jesus. But there's all these other stories.
Absolutely.
And you grew up in church, so maybe you've seen these stories on a flannel graph.
Oh, totally saw them on a flannel graph. And
So they need to
those tools are
connect
good.
the
Yeah.
story of Jesus with those stories as we
That's a huge
preach,
thing.
all of the Bible. But
Exactly.
what do you do for that?
Man, it's one of those things where as you look at the opportunities that we have in Kids Zone to take the truths of God's Word to the kid, you always want to take that thread of Christ and his love for us and his desire to have a relationship with us as the means of how it's all being sewn together in
Right.
their mind. Now, depending on the kid's age and their understanding of Scripture, and even their frequency of attendance, because sometimes they're a little more spotty kind of thing, and to that degree of wanting them to see and always hear that Jesus loves them, that Jesus cares for them, that Jesus desires a relationship with them, and that the truth and the strength and the wisdom that comes from these Bible stories comes because of the love for God.
Mm-hmm.
And connecting these things to it as the source of which they can go out and be like whoever,
Right.
David or Daniel, is coming from their relationship with Christ.
Yeah.
And so always want to be pointing back, always want to connect that. That's because that foundational level of what they're learning and establishing their faith on right now, we want it to be on Jesus.
A great resource, which we used a couple years ago in children's ministry, and we promoted it during the Cover to Cover series as we
Is
went
that-
through the
yep.
Bible, was the
Storybook Bible.
Jesus Storybook Bible,
Yeah.
right? And so then you can read through the Old Testament. Every story is connected with Jesus. Parents, that might be a great tool for you to get them to discover Jesus, because we're not just talking about Sunday morning, we're talking about in the home,
Always in the home.
as well, which
Yep.
is a big part of your ministry to parents
Yeah,
as well.
we'd love to encourage every parent, in that aspect, as they are God's given responsibility to you to raise your child up. We, as the church, are here to partner with you, to aid you, give you a sense of help that you're not alone in this, but, so any
Yeah.
tool we can give you is great.
That's good. And I'm encouraged as a parent. I got 4 boys. You have 4 boys, 1 girl. You have kids, right? I'm encouraged for our family and for your family that we have children's directors and pastors that are intentionally cultivating an environment where they can learn about Jesus on their level,
Yep.
where they can discover the gospel within that program, where they're given tools to grow in their faith, where they're connecting the biblical stories to Jesus, right?
Yep.
And you're intentional about leading those kids to discover
Absolutely.
Jesus.
Absolutely.
To me, here's why that's encouraging. I know when I'm checking in my kid, I'm not just checking them off to childcare.
Right.
And
I
then
hope
the
that's-
real D, the real discover is happening in here.
Right.
That's
Right.
not the case. That should not get lost in this conversation.
I hope, and I
So-
appreciate that, yeah. 'Cause
Don't you need some volunteers to help you with that?
that would be amazing, yeah.
All right, so there's a plug
Step
in for,
step in, step
Honestly,
up.
one of our goals, from the start has always been that the kids would drag their parents back to church, right? If we can
Right.
make the experience, fun enough and,
Yeah.
and relevant
Engaging
enough,
enough,
engaging enough, that hopefully the kids, they're like, when are we going back
Right.
again? And the fact that Isaac said that or whatever after that first day,
Yeah.
even as a teen, but I've heard that testimony lots of times. I know that was always our goal with VBSs and stuff too, that
Right.
the kids would drag their parents
Bring 'em
back.
back.
So
Yep.
Or
Okay,
would
so
stay there. It wouldn't stay there because it would reverse. The parents want to come.
Yeah, then
Yes,
the neighbor will
amen.
leave,
Yes,
yes.
amen. Yeah.
So
Yeah, absolutely. So from an adult point of view, you've been on staff now for 8 years?
Yeah, coming up on
Seven,
8.
seven or 8 years. How many times have you heard the gospel presented and given, it's over and over, isn't
Yeah,
it?
absolutely.
Whether it's you or whether it's me or some other pastor.
Yep.
I don't know if you ever feel this way, but given the amount of times that I preach during the year, I feel like even if it's back-to-back Sundays, I just said that. You know what I mean? And I tend to go that route too, where I'm giving people an intentional opportunity at the end of the service or at the end of the sermon to respond to the
Sure.
gospel. And yet I'm reminded that I don't know who's going to be there.
Well, sure.
Why wouldn't I preach this,
Yeah, and there's a difference when you make sure, when you would say you give the invitation like that, then it's a little more intentional. But we preach the gospel every single week,
Right.
regardless, and I love in Romans 1. The Apostle Paul is talking to these Romans. He's never been there yet. He's never been to Rome, and he's saying, "I've longed to come to you several times." And I think it's 1:14, but he says, "I long to come to you to preach the gospel to you." Now he's writing to Christians. You know what I mean? So he's writing these Christians. So clearly the gospel is a lot more than just the invitation to repent and believe, accept Christ.
right.
The gospel is something we need for the rest of our lives. We need to preach the gospel even to ourselves. The Psalms is full
Right.
of David going like, "Hey, why am I so downcast? Oh, my soul, renew this spirit within me and preach the gospel to myself." So it's something we have to do all the
Yep.
time. And so we as Christians need to hear it over and over again. But it's not just that simple,
Right.
"Oh, well, I just heard this." It's every part of the Bible,
Yeah.
it's everything's pointing to
So it's
Christ.
that dual shotgun, double barrel shotgun approach where you're preaching the gospel to believers and to
Yes.
unbelievers.
Yeah,
And the
absolutely.
way that's going to hit them is going to be different, right?
Absolutely. Well, hopefully they come into that environment where we are teaching. This is not just an evangelical hour. We call this Discover, but the primary reason we go to church is to worship God, right? So we are inviting people to come and see what God has done in the gospel and in this salvation offered from Christ. But they come into our midst where we are learning, we are worshiping, and they're exposed to the gospel. So that's not our only goal on a
Right.
Sunday morning. I mean, but we are more intentional. Because that would be the pushback, right? Sometimes people would be like, "Well, Sunday morning should just be worship. That's your only," and I get that. That is, we're there for God. We should be ministering to God, worshiping Him. But as a result, if you're doing that, then non-believers, somebody who's never been in church and experienced
Right.
this, they're going to be convicted of their sin. I want what you have. I need this, and then God does that work. All we
Sure.
do is share the message and repent and believe, and then their life can be
Yeah,
changed.
and I think what we've done a good job is being intentional about keeping in mind both.
Yeah.
Because I'm not putting down any church. I'm just saying I've been in too many experiences where it was an insider conversation, unless you understood certain terminology.
Yep.
Unless you know who Uncle Lou was,
yeah.
right, and his Aunt Sally, and
Or
you
if
just
you-
didn't know what was happening in that service.
Sure.
And so we're expecting guests,
Yep.
and we're expecting that a lot of those guests are not Christ followers.
Yes.
And we can't assume that we're going to preach the gospel in a way that's just landing on these people over here that are believers. We need to intentionally invite those people.
You
as
can't
well.
assume too much biblical knowledge. If you assume, well, they grew up in Sunday school, so they know the story of Jonah already, or David and Goliath, you have to explain
Yeah.
some of those things. You can't just assume that they know where the book of Amos is. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
Some of us Christians,
you can't assume that
it's
for
hard to find
church
those minor
people.
prophets. You just can't assume that stuff at all.
Yeah.
And that's another way that we're intentional about things on a Sunday. Having the scriptures up on the sides, it's not to be lazy. It's
Right,
so that
right.
people don't feel uncomfortable. You can
Exactly.
still encourage them, hey, turn in your Bibles.
And
you know?
it may shorten the sermon time,
It could, yeah.
That's always
so you're not
No, it's
searching.
not.
which
But-
people say amen to that.
But all those things are just ways that we're trying to be intentional, that we're having guests.
Yeah.
And one of the best ways to experience this for yourselves, guys, is invite people to church, right? And when you invite somebody and then go and sit with them, you bring them into church, you sit with them, you will notice everything in the service that you never noticed before,
Right,
right? Because and we call it a cringe factor.
Yeah.
Like if maybe we make an announcement or we make something that seems more like family or insider, you're gonna go like, oh, they don't understand that, or we call it cringe factor. But just try it. Invite somebody.
You'll have different eyes.
Yeah, you'll notice the cobwebs in the corner. You'll notice like something that's not right. That light bulb's out, and we need help with all those things. But we're expecting company, and we should be.
And then we should be ready for that company. You said come and see.
Yep.
The other side of that is go and tell. So we want to lead people to discover a full devotion to Jesus. And the environment that we do as a church is Sunday morning. That's what we focus on to make that happen. But at the same time, we want to equip people to go do that in their own personal life. How do we best do that? So that they're saying, I have a relationship with Jesus. I've discovered Jesus. I've been filled by Jesus. But now that's going to spell out unto them. And if you're not there yet, I think back to Luke 14. A couple months ago, we were in the Bring It All to the Table series. One of the things I love about that passage is the simple commission that the master gives the servants, and that is to say these words, come, for everything is now ready. This is not theologically deep. There is a place of grace where things are ready, where it will be there for you, and your job as partners of the gospel, at least in part, is to, if you don't have the words and if you're not there yet, to at least invite them to the place of grace. There's tools that we can do this in. If you want to talk about this, Andy, invite cards, and I'll share some prompts too that might.
Sure. Well, so one of the big things is if you're nervous, if you've never invited somebody to church, or you're nervous, like that they're gonna hate you or think you're mean. Like, so it's so simple, and we just tell people like, hey, we'd love, if you don't already have a church, we'd love for you to check out ours. It's literally that simple.
Can you say that simple phrase again?
So if you don't already have a church, so we're not assuming like you're at church and we're trying to take you from another one. Like if you don't already have a great church, would you could consider checking out ours, and then if you're able to hand them something, and our invites are simple, they're not like a track, it's not like explaining the whole gospel, it's just saying like you're invited,
service times and stuff like that,
and the information you need. Plus, of course, in our day of technology, we've got a great website, we've got sermons, so that's our front door, right? They can check us out ahead of time. People do all the time. In fact, sometimes they'll watch for weeks before they even come for the first time.
Yeah, absolutely. We need to update this in our membership packet, but we say that 70% of the people who attend our church, like that came to our church, came, and this was true a while ago, but 70% come because of a personal invite. 30% come as a result of the website. This was probably before the big push of social media, but I would probably say those numbers changed because so many people come as a result of hearing a testimony on Facebook that Chloe has done, or a promotional video for the new series, or someone's life was changed and we share that story. So they're coming as a result of social media, the website, but also those personal invitations. This is a tool that we encourage guys to put in your wallet. I keep mine in my wallet so that if a situation arises that's easy, you can pull it out. If you have a purse, ladies, you can put those in your purse as well. Here's a key tip though. When do I give those to people? Because you run out of friends. In fact, most statistics say that if you've been in church for 2 years, the number of non-Christian friends that you have dwindles fast because you become, our inward default is just to become, gravitate inward.
People like it,
Which could be a good thing. You're plugged into a small group. You're being influenced by Christians, not non-Christians. I get that, but your circle of influence decreases. So what's the triggers for making sure that you're going to run out of friends that So who can you give those to?
Well, I know where you're headed with this, and I would say the other thing we can do is be intentional about doing joining groups, doing things. Going to the gym. Being a coach, whatever.
Wrestling,
Like those are ways that we're going to continue to expand our influences like that, and meet new people. But I see what you're saying. So, we're always looking for people that are going through different things in life. So if you think of our own stories, if you think of your story, when you were more just because of either a transition, a tension, something going on in your
Tragedy.
life, a tragedy. That's the 3 T's. Is that all 3 of them there?
Transition, tension, tragedy.
Yeah.
Transition is a new person moves to the area.
Right. Yep. Happens all the
You
time.
invite them.
You know, when
A lot of
somebody
people are
comes-
moving to Wellsville.
Well, it only is.
Greece.
Place.
Greece.
Greece, it
I don't know about
happens.
Olean. Greece.
But
Listen up.
so yeah, that's a major mix up.
And
in
then
their life,
tension
and
would be, maybe there's a problem with your kid, or
Divorce,
marriage,
yeah,
divorce,
problems happening.
Job
those,
things.
and then tragedy. Someone passed away, someone got sick, someone got
Sure.
cancer. Those things, those 3 T's naturally happen within conversations
It
all the
does.
time.
And people are just more open at that time to want to come to church because they're looking for something, right? They're looking for a lifeline. I mean,
Yeah.
because it's easy when things are going to good to think, well, I got this pretty well, but all of a sudden God pulls the rug out and you're like, I don't got this, right?
Right.
So they're more open for answers, looking for answers.
And I'm so messed up that I don't know if your church will ever accept me. And you would say,
Well, I'd go back to that "Come to the Table" that the message you shared,
Yeah.
the song we sang during that, bring it all to the table, and it said, "There's nothing he ain't seen before." Bring your sorrows, bring your bring all those things. I love the message of that song because, I mean, people think like he could never forgive me of this again. I'm sorry, but you ain't seen nothing yet. And if you read the Bible and see the people that God used.
Yeah.
The murderers, the adulterers, the people that he changed their life forever and used them, not
Right.
just to save them, but then he used them to do great things. We're in good company
Yeah.
as these type of people. Like, none of us are perfect.
yeah, you're not disqualified because of your past. Christ can change you and use your future as well. And so we've seen, you've been pastor for a long time. We've been pastors for a long time. We've seen stories like that where people have been changed as a result. One of the people that I think of is the Slavins who now live in Rochester area. They were part of planning the Greece campus. Thomas is an elder at our church and has grown over the last 10 years getting into the Bible. Well, his story started 10 years ago where we were doing an outreach on downtown Main Street, the hustling bustle Main Street of Wellsville, New York, and we were handing out these invite cards for the series The Grinch, Enlarging Your Heart. It was our Christmas series. I believe it was in 2010. And we were singing carols and songs and handing out hot cocoa. And one of Thomas's friends said, you need to come meet this guy over here. He's the pastor at the church. And I gave him an invite, and he didn't think he would ever step into church. He comes to church, and that first Sunday, like, his eyes just open, very similar to what your story was, and his life was changed, but not everything changed. There were still struggles. Yep. And Thomas and Elise, I'm sure, can share their story at some point, but God did such an amazing work in their life. There was spiritual development and discipleship that happened, and now he's a big part of the leadership of the church. So it's amazing. But I think if you were to have a conversation with Thomas 10 years ago, he would have said, he would have laughed at you if you painted the picture of what God is doing in his life now and how he's being used. And so
You said they were part of launching Greece. They were part of launching Olean,
yeah.
over
That's
7
true,
years
that's
ago,
right.
and I believe they helped on the other launch teams too at the other campuses, because that's so near and dear to their heart.
Yep.
That because a couple people were willing to invite
Right.
them, they just want to give back. And I mean, if we think of our own stories, man, I just shared my testimony a couple weeks ago. The same idea. I'm so glad somebody invited me.
Right.
And I had no idea that might have been
what it
scary
takes,
for them.
yeah.
They might have had to work
Right.
themselves up to invite, this crazy partier Andy Hall to church,
Yep.
and probably thought that I was going to laugh at him. So, but-
usually, if your life is so messed up, you're willing to try pretty much
Yeah,
anything.
that's true.
And I know there's been so many stories like that. So, as we wrap up our time, I think we've covered enough. And I'd encourage you to keep leaning in and to be a part of this vision statement at our church, to lead people to discover, develop, and display full devotion to Jesus Christ. God changed you. You can be used by God to change other people. As we wrap up this conversation, what are some action steps that we can point people to grab onto and then take in this new year, 2021?
Action steps for discover
Yeah,
in
more-
particular.
yeah.
Well, I'd say, I mean, probably the first thing is you can't be offering to somebody something you don't
You
have.
don't have.
So if you're not already going to church, I would say 3 to 4 times a month, not the 1.7.
Wait, did you say miss 3 to 4 times?
No, I would say go 3 to 4.
A year, I would say.
But I mean, let's.
And can I add a caveat there? Because I know
Yeah.
so many people listening to this on Facebook, you actually participate and engage in the worship service on Facebook. There's situations in your life happening right now where you're not attending physically, but you are attending virtually, if you want to call it that. What I appreciate about those people, because we followed up with you and had conversations, is that you're leaning in, you're engaging with church, you haven't backed off during this COVID season.
Yep.
I think what you're speaking to is the people who have disengaged.
Yeah, and I'm speaking of like historically.
Yeah.
Like for literally historically, whether it's 20 years or 10 years, however long you've been coming to church, don't be average. Who wants to be average, right? And if 1.7 is average, let's shoot for above average. But again, how
2.1.
Yeah, how often are you going to be inviting somebody to church if you know that this week, well, you might go boating?
Yeah.
Well, if it's nice out, I'm probably going to mow the lawn.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah,
So,
right.
so I would just say you can't offer something you don't have. So let's make it a priority for ourselves to be there, and then you're going to be way more apt to invite people. And then if you invite people, bring people, man, you're going to see what we've been talking about, right? Like
Yes.
having somebody with you, being
Seeing
part of
those
the
things,
process,
yeah.
what it is to show somebody for the first time.
So,
exciting.
number 1, make church a priority. Number 2, listen and look for ways for you to invite others. Those 3 T's: transition, tragedy, where there's tension, let that be a trigger to invite them to church. Anything for, and related to kids and students and adults listening. I don't think that many kids are listening to this right now, but what can they do?
I mean, for my sake, I would always be encouraging, again, as you've heard Pastor Andy and Pastor Jeremy talking about, getting invested, being at church, being there. A major part of what church looks like on a normal basis for you guys that are watching is what happens in the sanctuary. And what I'm encouraging you guys to do is, if you guys are excited about being in church and wanting to be there, your kids are going to be excited about being in church. Your teenagers are going to be excited about wanting to be invested in their own relationship with Christ. So, I mean, come get in there. And then as you're coming and you're inviting those friends that have kids and teenagers, I mean, that's what's exciting, is that when we see the family becoming what God created it to be. So be invested. Just come discover who Christ is. So your kids will have a better chance of discovering who He is as well.
That's good. And then lastly, found people, find people. That's one of our core values. So if you have discovered, then you need to leverage your life to lead others to do the same. That's sharing Christ, knowing Christ, growing in Christ. How about serving?
Yes.
If discover is our worship environment, that's the environment on Sunday morning, then, and you can't lead worship, but you can make a nice cup of coffee.
That's right.
That's your role.
Super
If you are super friendly and you don't mind talking to people, you're an extrovert, then you go greet. And you see those people that need greeting. And so leverage your life, leverage your gifts, leverage your experiences, leverage your passions to introduce people to the life-changing message of Jesus Christ.
Amen.
Be a part of the vision, and that is discover. So thanks for joining us for this conversation. Tune in next week as we look at the second D, develop meaningful relationships while growing towards Christ-like maturity. Until then, we'll see you later, guys.